Searchers
Park and 90th and Division.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, the president's veto of the tax cut bill as seen by Congressman Watts and Bonnier. A newsmaker interview with Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers. An Ian Williams update of the East Timor story. A Steve Forbes campaign snapshot with Michael Powell of the Washington Post. A Clarence Page essay about the joys of browsing. And Patton, as played by the actor George C. Scott, who died Wednesday. It all follows our summary of the news this Thursday.
It took millions of years to create the world's oil supply and 150 years to deplete it. Who is helping to cut the world's need for oil with renewable energy sources?
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Travelers Insurance.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
President Clinton vetoed the tax cut bill today. He killed the nearly $800 billion Republican plan at a White House Rose Garden ceremony. He said it was bad for Medicare, education, and the economy. Later, Republicans gathered at the Capitol. They vowed to offer another tax cut before the end of this Congress next year. We'll have more on the story right after this news summary. The Clinton administration proposed new safeguards against money laundering today. They would require check cashiers, brokerage houses, and casinos to notify authorities of suspicious transactions the way banks must do now. The move was sparked by allegations Russian gangsters channeled criminal proceeds through U.S. banks. Attorney General Reno announced the regulations in Washington.
This comprehensive strategy we announced today sets out specific action items for Justice and Treasury law enforcement personnel to implement. Some examples of this effort will be to stress the importance of financial investigative training for our prosecutors and investigators, to work to ensure that investigative information to identify and target major money launderers is appropriately shared among the law enforcement agencies. The scheme of cleansing criminal monies through legitimate bank accounts must be stopped.
The head of the International Monetary Fund said today there was no evidence of official Russian corruption or money laundering. Managing Director Michelle Camdessu said the IMF's own review of the matter uncovered no irregularities. He said the fund was prepared to release another installment this year of a multi-billion-dollar loan to Russia. We'll talk to Treasury Secretary Summers about this and other matters later in the program tonight. It was a down day on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 205 points to close at 10,318. The NASDAQ index dropped 108 points to 2749. Rescue teams raced against time today to dig out earthquake survivors in central Taiwan. The death toll from Tuesday's quake rose to more than 2,100. Taiwan's Disaster Management Center said 1,800 were still missing and presumed buried by rubble or landslides. U.S. workers pulled a man from the wreckage after 8 hours of digging. NASA's Mars satellite probe was lost in space today. It was presumed destroyed after it failed to regain radio contact with Earth. Officials said a major navigation error sent the probe too deep into the red planet's atmosphere, and it likely broke into pieces or burned up. The $125 million spacecraft was supposed to study the weather on Mars and search for evidence of water. Two big business mergers were announced today. Chicago's Commonwealth Edison and Philadelphia's Pico Energy Company will create the nation's largest electric utility. It will have 5 million customers, revenues of $12 billion. Earthlink and Mindspring will create the second largest internet access provider in the U.S. It will service 3 million subscribers. Another white man was sentenced to death today for the dragging death of a black man in East Texas last year. A jury decided that white supremacist Lawrence Russell Brewer should die by lethal injection. The panel found him guilty of the murder on Monday. He'll join an accomplice already on death row, a third suspect in the killing of James Byrd Jr., will be tried next month. Actor George C. Scott is dead. He died at his home outside Los Angeles of an aneurysm. He was best known for playing General George Patton in the movie Patton. He won an Oscar for that performance, but then refused to accept it. In addition to movies, he had a long career in the theater, starring most recently in the Broadway revival of Inherit the Wind in 1996. George C. Scott was 71 years old. We'll have an excerpt from Patton at the end of the program tonight. Between now and then, the tax veto, Treasury Secretary Summers, an East Timor update, a Steve Forbes snapshot, and a Clarence Page essay. The President's veto of the tax cut bill. Kwame Holman begins our coverage.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
President Clinton chose to make his veto of the Republicans' $792 billion tax cut bill a Rose Garden event. He was confident his decision was in line with feelings expressed by most Americans.
The bill is too big, too bloated, places too great a burden on America's economy. It would force drastic cuts in education, health care, and other vital areas. It would cripple our ability to pay down the debt. It would not add a day to the Social Security Trust Fund. It would not add a day to the Medicare Trust Fund or modernize Medicare with prescription drug coverage. Nearly $1 trillion in tax cuts, but not $1 for Medicare. I will veto this bill because it is wrong for Medicare, wrong for Social Security, wrong for education, and wrong for the economy.
The president's veto was long anticipated. He warned congressional Republicans as they debated the tax cut plan back in July that he would not agree to it. Republicans went ahead nonetheless, passing the plan by a thin, mostly party line margin. But they delayed sending the bill to the president until last week, hoping to stir more public support for it.
High taxes are an infringement on the liberty of our families. That's why we want to give tax relief, because we believe in less taxing, less spending, less government, and more freedom.
Today, however, after the veto, the mood of Republican leaders on Capitol Hill was more somber.
This was a broad tax relief package that would provide relief to married families, to women to go back into the workplace, for education in America, for low-income Americans. It is a good bill. And I regret the president has stolen this tax cut from working American families.
I tell you, this Congress is not going to throw in the towel on tax relief for the American people. We will have another tax bill in this Congress. Now, I'm not sure when. It may be later or not sooner, but we will not give up on tax relief for the American people.
President Clinton expressed similar sentiments.
Let's do first things first. Pay down the debt, save Social Security, save and modernize Medicare, invest in education. If we can work together to meet these objectives, we can also work together to pass tax relief we can afford. Affordable middle-class tax relief that reflects the priorities of both parties and the values of the American people. That would be a good bill I would happily sign.
Elizabeth Farnsworth takes it from there.
Two views on the political fallout from today's veto. Representative J.C. Watts of Oklahoma is the chairman of the House Republican Conference. Representative David Bonnier of Michigan is the Democratic whip. Representative Watts, what do you think about what the president did today and what you just heard him say?
Well, that's unfortunate, and that the president, in my opinion, I think he turned his back on those poor communities out there that had some relief in this bill through the American Community Renewal Act. Rural America, working families, those single moms out there working from paycheck to make ends meet. We were proposing over the next 10 years to give the American people 3 pennies back of every dollar that they make. I think I thought that was fair.
And Congressman Watts, what about what the president said, that if you can cooperate, you can still come up with something?
Well, the president has yet to come to the table or contact us about negotiating anything. The president said today in his address that he had sent us a Medicare reform package. Yeah, I was absent from school, I guess, the day that happened because I don't remember getting anything. So the president says these things, but we would be more than willing to talk to the president about, giving the American people tax relief.
Congressman Bonnier, how do you see the possibility for a compromise tax cut bill?
Well, I think we need to do first things first. And of course, the problem with this tax bill was that it exploded the deficit, which would have, of course, raised interest rates, which would have, in fact, been the cruelest tax on working men and women in this country. Higher interest rates on mortgages, higher interest rates on credit cards, higher interest rates on auto loans. An interest rate increase of 1% on a $100,000 home mortgage is about $70 a month. Having said all of that, to answer your question, Elizabeth, I'm hopeful that we can get together and deal with the priorities that the president laid out, including some tax legislation that will give a benefit to working men and women. Social Security strengthening, Medicare strengthening, dealing with the educational needs of our country are priority items. The president also suggested, and I would also concur, that working men and women in this country deserve a tax break. And I think the proportionality of that bill ought to fit in with the other issues that I've raised.
Congressman Watts, can any of the bill as you wrote it be salvaged? The removal of the marriage tax penalty, for example.
Well, I think the marriage tax penalty is very important. That creates tax fairness to say you should not be penalized $1,200 more per year.
But I mean, these are things that there are elements of the bill that both parties supports. Can some of those get through short of some big compromise bill?
Well, I got to tell you, I don't think the president wants tax relief. His budget proposes over the next 10 years $938 billion in new spending. So, if you take $792 billion and give it back to the American people, that's going to cut those new spending needs short. And we've been saying all along, if you don't send the money back home, Washington's gonna spend it. And so, but there's plenty out there when you consider what we have in the package. You've got the marriage tax penalty, and we eliminate that. the death tax, relief for poor communities across the board, tax cut. We've got relief in there for educational needs to help families take care of their senior loved ones. All this was in this package, which made a very sound package.
I want to ask you both, and beginning with you, Congressman Bonnier, the conventional wisdom is that neither party really wanted this to pass, that this was political posturing, that it serves both parties' interests to have this deadlock. What's your response to that?
Well, I want a tax cut for the American people, for working people, and no, this was not posturing on our behalf. We would like something that fits into the proportionality question that I raised earlier. This was way out of line. Sending money home to the American people is something that we're for, but under this particular bill, Elizabeth, a family making $300,000 a year or more would on an average get about $46,000 a year in a tax cut. A family making $52,000 a year would get about $11 a day. There was no sense of fairness to this, no sense of proportionality. So, yes, I think we need to come together. We can agree on the marriage penalty reform. We can agree on family farm relief. We can agree on some small business relief. But we can also, I think, work towards targeting it to working middle-income people in this country. And that's not what this bill did.
Okay, and Congressman Watts, reply briefly to that, but then to the overall question about whether Republicans really wanted a deal.
Well, based on my friend's numbers of what people get back, we obviously disagree on those numbers. I don't see how it's bad for the economy or for the American people for them to get some of their money back to do what they need to do with it. That's good for the economy. That's good for interest rates. That's good for keeping inflation down and strengthening the economy to allow people to have their money back. We wanted this tax relief package, this tax fairness package, because it helps a lot of people. It helps every single taxpayer out there get some of their money back. So we will continue to fight for this relief, to fight for tax fairness, because it's not only important, but it's the right thing to do.
So your response to the charge that it's all political posturing is just that that's not true?
Well, no, I disagree with that. We've actually had tax cuts or tax relief every year that the Republicans have been in the majority. So we've got a track record for giving the American people their money back.
Okay,
Listen,
go ahead,
Elizabeth,
yeah.
I just wanted to mention that I just watched Bill Archer, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the Republican chairman, who on the floor just a few minutes ago said he was stunned that the president vetoed this bill. Well, everybody in America, everybody in the world who pays attention to this stuff knew for months that the president was going to veto this bill. So when you ask the question, are they posturing, there is some posturing going on here. But the real question is, why are we going to move forward on the other issues that are important as well as tax relief for middle-income people, and that is taking care of Medicare, prescription drugs for our elderly, making sure that we have Social Security solvent for baby boomers and for their children. These are all important questions, and then the education piece just begs to be addressed. There'll be no room for any of these reforms in the areas that I just talked about if you pass a $1 trillion tax cut that goes primarily to the wealthiest people.
Okay, Congressman Watts, what is happening now with the appropriations bills? Can you get, I think there are 13, right, appropriations bills that you need to get passed by September 30th, the end of the fiscal year. Can you get that done? Will there be a train wreck with a government closed again?
No, I don't think it will be. I think we're going to get our work done. We've gotten 12 of those 13 bills passed through the House. The 13th appropriations bill, we marked it up today. There was labor HHS. So we're going to have our work done. And not only did we do our work, or will we have our work done at the end of the day, but we wanted tax relief, and tax relief that pays down the national debt. We did that. We $2.2 trillion over the next 10 years. We take every dollar that comes into Social Security and Medicare, set it aside for those programs. We call that the lockbox, but it's protecting Social Security's trust fund. This is good for the economy, it's good for Social Security, and it's good for Medicare, and it's good to pay down our national debt. We've done all those things.
Okay, and Congressman Bonnier, what do you think? Will the president sign the appropriations bills as they've been passed?
Well, they've only been 4 sent to the president, and we have 13 of them. We've got a week left in the session. We've not accomplished very much in this Congress, and so the president is going, I think he's got veto messages out on about half of the appropriation bills. We have to work very hard, and as the president said, we need to stay here to get this business done, the appropriation process. We need to stay here to get the Medicare issue resolved with prescription drug care and those cuts in hospitals and nursing homes, making sure that that doesn't happen because we've gone too far in that area. We need to stay here to do the education reforms.
So, Congressman Watts, are we hearing here in this debate between the two of you a key debate for the election year that's coming up? Is this sort of is the veto the kickoff for this debate, and will it be a big part of the campaign?
Well, let me first say I agree with my friend that we do need to take care of those home health issues, those hospital issues out there. You know, we've got some things on the table as we speak to make sure that we do that. You know, giving the American people tax relief, I am willing to go back home, and Republican members, we're willing to go back home and say to our constituents, yes, we fought to give you tax relief and bring about tax fairness, and let them be the judge of, let them determine how they want to judge us on Election Day. But this is an issue that Republicans that we're willing to win or lose on, because when the American people pay more in taxes and they pay in food, clothing, and shelter combined, we believe that's too much.
And Congressman Bonnier?
Well, we also believe in a tax cut, but for middle-income people. We don't want it targeted to the very wealthiest corporations and individuals. This bill had a $37 billion tax relief for multinational corporations, insurance companies, banks to invest abroad. That is not in line with the priorities of our party. We want it to target it to middle-income people, and we want those other issues, Medicare, Social Security, and education, to receive the attention they deserve. They can't under the bill that they propose because that $1 trillion bill squeezes out everything else.
All right. Thank you both very much.
Now to a newsmaker interview with Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers. Mr. Secretary, welcome.
Good to be with you, Jim.
You are listening to that debate between Congressman Bonnier and Congressman Watts. Is the end result just going to be a campaign issue for the year 2000?
I hope not. I hope we'll focus on doing what we've got a real opportunity to do in this country this year, which is to take advantage of the surpluses, to put money aside for Medicare, put it aside for Social Security, make sure we can keep funding our education programs, and pay down the national debt. I think that's what will keep the terrific strength of our economy going. There are a lot of different ideas as to how that should best be done, and I think that's the discussion we should be having, and it's the one we certainly want to have with all sides, and to work out what's best and reflects everybody's priorities as to how best to do what I think most people who look at the American economy think we need, which is paying down that debt and using the surpluses to meet the obligations that we know we're going to have in the future, and budgeting in a real way, not so we can grow the government. God knows it's 500,000 fewer people than we had 6 years ago, but rather so that we can avoid having huge 50% cuts in education and Secret Service and all the things that the government does. That's what we ought to be sitting down to do, and that's certainly what the president made clear today he's prepared to sit down and do.
But Congressman Watts just said that the president has yet to come to the table. There have been no negotiations between the White House and the Republican leadership, or the Treasury Department and the Republican leadership.
Well, the president's laid out a Medicare plan. The president's laid out a framework where you put that money into Social Security. No, the president isn't going to talk about tax cuts that would use up all the available funds and force 50% cuts on education. He's not going to do that. No, the president's not going to sit down and have a negotiation about privatizing Social Security, because that's the wrong thing. But if there's agreement on the basic thrust, as he said today, which is saving the surpluses, using them to extend solvency of Social Security and Medicare, I can assure you that we're ready to sit down anytime and to try to work something out.
All right, Mr. Secretary, on to some other things here. On money laundering, you and Attorney General Reno announced some proposals today to tighten the laws on money laundering. But the head of the IMF said today they had found no evidence of fraud or money laundering in the Russian government. Does that jive with your understanding of the situation?
Well, I think you have to look at a number of different elements, Jim. In Russia, our understanding is that there's no evidence that the IMF's funds themselves were diverted for purposes other than those for which they were intended. But we've all known for a very long time that corruption is a large problem in Russia, and that capital flight is a large problem. And that's why the thrust of our efforts in Russia have been to establish the rule of law, have been to resist corruption by getting rid of the opportunities for corruption. You know, a few years ago in Russia, a pack of Marlboros cost the same amount as a barrel of oil. And in that kind of environment, you're obviously going to get people with oil who are going to be exporting it for dollars, and all kinds of distortions. We've worked to try to reduce those kinds of situations. So I don't think anybody who's looked at the Russian situation can be satisfied or can fail to recognize that Russia needs to put in place the rule of law. But I do think, without minimizing their problems in any way, that people also do need to remember that it's a different country than it was a decade ago. It's turned, I think, irrevocably away from communism. It's spending 10% of what it used to be spending on defense. It's much more open, and what we've got to do is be very hard-headed, but recognize that we do as a country have a huge interest in whether Russia becomes a market economy, whether it stays a democracy, on how it makes the very difficult transition from a society that was really ruled by the law of force to a society where it can be the force of law that's decisive.
So the IMF, despite the corruption, despite the money laundering, the IMF is correct, and you support their decision to go ahead and continue giving the loan money to Russia?
Jim, I support the decision that they've made with our very active involvement in the current context, which is different from the way it had been before the financial collapse in August of 1998. What the IMF's doing today is a partial refinancing of the debt that's coming due to it from Russia, so that Russia will on net be paying back the IMF, but the IMF's not collecting everything that's owed. It's refinancing a portion, and it's doing so using a technical device known as special drawing rights, which has the property that the money can be used only to pay back the IMF. It's not possible for it to be diverted, and I think that's a prudent safeguard in the current circumstance in Russia.
Mr. Secretary, I know that what you just said about Russia and how important it is, but just in simple terms, to the average American, why does it matter to the United States whether or not Russia is having serious economic problems?
It matters because we've seen historically what can happen when strong countries are humiliated. Think about what happened in Germany in the 1920s and 1930s and what it led to. It matters because the strength of Russia's economy affects its ability to control its 30,000 nuclear weapons. It matters because the capacity of Russia to join the world of market economies with more oil and mineral resources than any other country in the world outside of the Middle East, with technological prowess that it showed during the Cold War period was really quite substantial. But for all of those reasons, but I would say the most important of them, is our basic national security interest, which has permitted us to be secure in a way that we certainly weren't when I was a child, because Russia is no longer hostile to the United States in the way that it was. And keeping that situation, it seems to us, it seems to I think most people who look at it, requires encouraging Russia to be democratic and to develop its democracy and to become market-oriented.
On another subject, the U.S. dollar, the value has fallen sharply against the Japanese yen this past summer. Why?
Jim, we don't try to interpret the fluctuations in currency markets. You've heard me and my predecessor, Bob Rubin, state our policy many, many times that a strong dollar is in our interest. But I think the right priority and focus for those of us in government is not to try to manage markets or manage two markets, but instead is to concentrate on the fundamentals of our economy. That's what we're doing when we work on budget surpluses, when we work on funding and reforming Medicare, when we work on encouraging Americans to save, when we work on opening foreign markets, when we work to stress education, and ultimately what'll be most important for the success of our economy is building fundamentals that are as strong as we possibly can.
But if a strong dollar is good for America and the dollar is weak against the yen, that's bad for America, right? Doesn't that add up?
Well, you know, there are a lot of currencies. There are a lot of currencies in the world that you have to look at in thinking about that. But I think the more fundamental point really is economic fundamentals, both here in the United States and in Japan. And really, the priority for Japan at this point, in our judgment, has to be growing its economy based on domestic demand. That means not gaining its economic strength from selling things abroad, but gaining its economic strength from selling things at home based on Japanese consumers spending more, Japanese businesses investing more. And that's what we'll be discussing with the Japanese at the upcoming G7 meeting.
What advice would you give to all of us for how to interpret what the stock market did today in reaction to what the yen is doing against the dollar? The Dow was down over 200, NASDAQ was down over 100. Give us some advice on that, please, sir.
Well, Jim, as you can appreciate, it's not my place to give people investment advice. I think that
but how to read
by and
that?
Large.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a mistake to try to interpret day-to-day or week-to-week fluctuations in markets. Certainly, we've had a very great improvement in the fundamentals of our economy over the last few years, and that's been certainly perhaps the main one of the driving factors behind the strength of markets. But I don't think that we can prudently assess a single day or two's movements in markets. From what our people at Treasury who watch these things tell me, there were a variety of factors, both domestic and international, that were operating in the markets today.
If you decided that, and I know you won't go into any details on this, but if you decided that there was a necessity to intervene, to do something to help the dollar. Do you feel you have the tools available to do it?
Well, the whole question of what actions we might or might not take in markets is not something that, for obvious reasons, we talk about. We talk about publicly, Jim. But I think there's no question that the United States has significant reserves and tools at its disposal.
Okay. Now, on back to the yen and the effect it has also on the trade deficit. There's been some new figures out this week. The trade deficit, the U.S. trade deficit, is way up to record heights. What's the cause of that, and what can be done about it?
I think the largest cause, Jim, ironically, is the strength of the American economy. Because our economy has grown more rapidly than other economies, we've been in a position to demand more imports from them than they've been able to demand from us because they haven't been doing so well. And that's why I think the crucial global economic priority that we'll all be discussing at the G7 meeting and the IMF World Bank meetings in the next few days is how to achieve more balanced growth globally, because I think a more balanced pattern of global growth will contribute, obviously, to the welfare of other countries, but most importantly for us as Americans, to a greater level of exports and a reduced trade and current account deficit, and that means a healthier economy.
Balance meaning what? That everybody goes up and down at the same time, rather than the U.S. does this and Japan does that. Is that what you mean?
Well, by balance, what I really just mean is that the United States isn't the single engine propelling the economy, but that you have some impetus to global growth coming from Europe and Japan. And there's some encouraging signs in that regard, but there's also a lot to talk about.
Finally, on a personal note, Mr. Secretary, much was said and written in July about how difficult it was going to be for you to replace Robert Rubin. How hard has it been? It's been 3 months, almost 3 months, 2.5 months.
Bob Rubin's a remarkable man and a tough act to follow, but he and I worked very closely together during the time that he was secretary and I was deputy secretary, and I think we've managed a transition that I feel good about, and I think that under President Clinton's leadership, the right basic course has been set at Treasury, and I think we've been carrying on that course. And what I think is always the most important measure for us, which is how the American economy and American citizens are doing, those measures look pretty good right now, so I feel good.
But it's the Summers Treasury Department following Summers' policies and philosophies?
Well, I think that any Secretary of the Treasury puts his stamp on what the institution does over time. But I think we have done that recognizing that we're starting from a very strong economic situation, and that the basic tenets of our policy, fiscal discipline, budget surpluses, opening markets abroad, making key investments here, modernizing the financial system, responding to international problems as they need to be responded to. Those basic tenets are in place, and I think what we need to do is implement them in as effective a way as possible, and that's what all the people at Treasury are working very hard to do.
All right. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Jim.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, an East Timor update, a Forbes campaign snapshot, and a Clarence Page essay. Ian Williams of Independent Television News has the East Timor story.
It was the most tense moment since the peacekeepers arrived. There was anger and confusion as Australian soldiers were sent scrambling after bursts of gunfire were heard in the centre of Dili. British Special Forces entered a building where they thought the firing had come from. It was a barracks belonging to the Indonesian army, and when they emerged, there was a tense standoff. The British left, allowing the Indonesians to return to a task that's preoccupied them for most of the week, trashing the barracks they'll soon be leaving. The shooting was blamed on Indonesian soldiers firing into the air from the back of a lorry, but it was enough to alarm the general in charge of the peacekeepers.
It's the case that when people are running around shooting weapons in the air or near other people, the temperature goes right up. This could so easily have led to deaths both on the part of civilians who are minding their own business and soldiers who are trying to bring security into an area where there has been none.
The tension didn't prevent a steady stream of refugees from returning to Dili. The peacekeepers have established safe havens to prevent them being harassed by the militia or the army. Among those returning, Rui Manuel, who worked as a UN translator during the vote on independence. He made the risky journey here to plead for security and food for 3,000 refugees with whom he's sheltering in the hills. He also revealed how local UN workers had received anonymous letters warning them about militia plans to burn the city. But his UN bosses dismissed them.
At first we tried to give the letters to some of international staff, but they said that it is okay.
So the international staff didn't take the letter seriously?
Yeah, they didn't take their letter seriously. They just said that this is actually just, how can I say, nonsense.
But the peacekeepers will have to sort out Dili before they can deploy much further afield. And in spite of a number of arrests of suspected militia members, that's not proving an easy task. This afternoon, the mayor's office was set on fire, just a short distance from an Australian checkpoint. It was one of the few buildings that was still intact. Suspicion again fell on Indonesian soldiers, who've even been burning their own barracks, determined to leave nothing behind as they prepare to leave East Timor. By the end of tomorrow, the majority of Indonesian soldiers and police will have pulled out of East Timor, not a moment too soon for many people here. But 2 battalions will remain, and tonight cooperation with them looks shakier than ever.
Now a Steve Forbes campaign snapshot and to Terrence Smith.
On the road again.
Since his strong second-place showing in the Iowa Straw Poll last month, publisher and presidential hopeful Steve Forbes has campaigned vigorously in 11 states. Yesterday, as part of a 5-day campaign swing through California, the candidate spoke with student newspaper editors at McLean High School in Fresno.
I am running for president for the Republican nomination. My platform comes from Abraham Lincoln's words at Gettysburg, where he said that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. I believe that a new birth of freedom would include allowing parents to choose schools they think best for their children, would allow you to choose your own doctor instead of an HMO or a bureaucracy telling you where you have to go, the freedom to be safe and secure in this world, which means enforcing the law here at home so we can avoid future Columbines, and finally, on one of the most sensitive issues in America today, I believe the freedom to be born. I recognize that many people don't agree with my pro-life goal, but I hope to begin a national dialogue to help persuade people each step of the way towards that goal. Why don't we start the questioning?
Mr. Ford, when you were running in 1996, you dropped out of the election for candidate. What made you want to run again?
I believe that there is still a very real need for bold and exciting leadership in the White House to make positive things happen. In Washington, they talk. I want to do real things, whether it's Social Security, getting rid of this tax code that oppresses people. None of the other candidates have put real proposals to make these positive things happen.
Mr. Forbes seemed delighted to get a question on a favorite theme of his, the need for standards in public life.
What are the basic standards that you'd like to convey to the youth of America?
It's a very good question. And that is, again, a strong sense of what is right and what is wrong. Not just talking about it, but trying to live by example. And that is not telling lies, not trying to skirt the law, not trying to misuse the powers of the government against your opponents, as has happened in recent years. Being faithful to one's, in this case, one's wife, not using drugs, respecting others. It's very basic.
In this session, as in others, the candidate, who has never held public office, was questioned about why he thinks he is qualified to be president.
I'm not a lifetime politician. I think it's very important to bring an outsider in to make the changes so we break out of this rut, this ditch that we're in Washington. I am a businessman, CEO. I've run a real company, over 1,000 people, having people work together for a shared purpose, having to satisfy customers. If you don't satisfy customers, you don't succeed. As a businessman, I've been around the world doing business, writing stories, visited almost 60 countries, so I have, I think, as much or more knowledge of the workings of the world than the other candidates. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'm taking my case to the people, and the people will be the ultimate judge, as it should be.
Later that morning, the candidate attended a Rotary luncheon at the Fresno Convention Center. Once again, he stressed the outsider theme.
In America today, there probably hasn't been a time when there's been such a disconnect. In Washington, too often, even with our own Republican Party there, it too often seems to be an isolated world. One wonders what happens to the air there, what is in the water there, that turns otherwise sensible people into doing what they do. You wonder, where is the EPA when you need it? And while we can chuckle about it, this kind of disconnect does have some very real consequences. We have enormous opportunities, but we also face enormous problems. Problems with China, growing tax code, regulations here at home, our schools not doing the job they should. Can we make these positive things happen? The answer is yes. And that's why I'm making my appeal to the American people. Thank you very much and bless you. Thank you.
For more, we turn to Washington Post reporter Michael Powell. The NewsHour is working with the Post in covering the 2000 presidential race. Michael has traveled with Steve Forbes in Iowa and is working on a profile of the candidate. Michael, welcome. You've been out on the campaign trail with Mr. Forbes. What's it like?
It's very controlled. It's very orderly. He sometimes changes a joke, nary a wit from one setting to the next. If you're national press, print press, it's hard to get a lot of access. In fairness to him, I think not unlike a lot of candidates. They want to, what their concentration on, and they do it with a Prussian efficiency, is to get the local media, be it the radio guys or the local newspaper, onto the bus with it and give them the 20 minutes, get them off.
What about the fellow from the Washington Post?
He eventually got that 20 minutes and got hustled off. No, he was fine. I mean, I got neither more nor less than the other people, but I think really the sense was in Iowa, they wanted to talk to Iowa media, not particularly to myself or to the New Yorker and the other.
But is that a matter of style, or is it control of the candidate?
I think it's both. I think that there's a sense that they are trying to shift his message a bit and his message a bit from the last time around, and I think they don't want to, this is sort of, they're doing their test runs out here, and I don't think they want to have us running around behind the set, sort of asking questions, well, what about this and this?
Well, last time out, of course, he stressed one big issue, the flat tax, and he basically campaigned on that, soft-pedaled the social issues. What about this time?
Social issues are very much to the forefront. I think there's a, in fact, I know there's a strategy to essentially go right and then worry about capturing the center later, the assumption being clearly that Bush has that center. So he's gone right with a passion, talking about abortion, talking about the Ten Commandments, even talking a little bit about evolution. And those are all clearly designed, and I don't mean to suggest they're not real, deeply held positions, but they're clearly designed to try to capture the right, convince them I'm the man with the money. I'm the guy when all the rest, when the Gary Bowers and the Dan Quayles are by the side of the road, I'm going to be sitting there with my money, and I have your positions, you being the Christian right or other groups on the right.
At heart and in my mind.
That's right.
How is it playing? What's the reception that he's getting generally?
I think he's not the sort of candidate that sends people screaming into the streets wanting to sign up, but I do think that he has there's an earnestness that, at least in places like Iowa, played very well. People seemed very respectful. They listened. I would ask people afterwards, well, what do you think? And they would say, he's in the mix. And they would name 1 or 2 or 3 different candidates they're looking at. They seem to like him. And it is a very well-funded campaign. I mean,
Is the money sort of a presence in the campaign? Can you feel it and see it?
Yes, relative to some of the other candidates, because you'll come into these tiny little towns and there'll be 4 or 5 advanced people there. He'll come in with the 2 buses. They always have somebody driving the cars behind if the reporters need to get into the bus with him. It's a very, I mean, there's a lot of thought, and he's already running some ads in some of these states well ahead of some of the other candidates.
Does he seem to enjoy himself? Does he seem to enjoy campaigning?
I think it's at best an acquired taste for him. I think he sometimes, and you'll see that in I think some of the clips there, when he tells a joke and he gets a response, he'll get a little glimmer that sort of suggests that he's liking it. But he's not somebody like a Bush, God knows, a Bobby Kennedy or something like that. Somebody who seems to revel in it, or Clinton. He's not like that. I mean, and that's sort of part of his appeal, is to be sort of the anti-candidate, the antithesis of all that. I mean, at least that's what he'd like you to buy.
And of course, there's a long road ahead.
That's right.
Thanks very much, Michael Powell.
Thank you.
You can get more information on this story on the Washington Post website as well as ours. Finally tonight, essayist Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune talks of browsing.
I hear America speeding up, getting faster all the time. Just as the slow steadiness of the horse and buggy era gave way to the car and the jetliner, the car and the jet are giving way to something even faster, the internet. Thanks to the web, we don't even have to leave the house.
Hey, Cleo, we're on the internet. I'm going to buy the car I want.
We can work on the web, say hi to friends on the web, buy books, CDs, even home appliances on the web. You may not need to get dressed anymore, but if you do, you can buy clothes on the web, and a car.
Hello? Your car's ready.
My car?
Clothing? Cars? To me, the best part of buying a car is shopping for it, looking at it, getting in it, getting a feel for it, taking it for a drive. Now just think for a minute. If all the places where we used to buy a car are going to be on the web, then the places where we used to buy a car are going to go out of business. Do we really want that? It's already happening with bookstores. They're disappearing. First came the superstores, then came the web, Amazon.com, and others. As a result, hundreds of independent bookstores have gone out of business. Others are hanging on the best they can. Just a few blocks from the White House, a bookstore called Chapters is one of 26 plaintiffs in a suit by the American Booksellers Association against the 2 big superstore chains, Borders and Barnes & Noble. They allege that the big superstores are getting unfair deals and special treatment from the major publishers. The big stores deny the charge, but either way, the independent bookstore is feeling the squeeze. Across America, the independent bookstore is going the way of the mom-and-pop grocery store, the family-owned drugstore, and movie theaters with balconies. In the next century, some people say, everyone will shop on the web. If so, what places will be left to shop off the web?
We, or our children, will gain a lot in this new age. Speed, convenience, variety. But what will we lose? I suspect we will lose the personal touch. Someone who knows our name. Someone who understands our tastes. Someone who appreciates our literary appetite.
We will lose browsing. Real browsing requires a real store, a place to feel the merchandise, to thumb through it, to think about it. Browsing offers a break, a mini vacation from the accelerating world outside. True browsing is less about the destination than the meandering journey that gets you there. The internet has browsers, or so they say. Actually, it is not. If anything, it should be called a searcher, for that is what it does.
Media guru Marshall McLuhan didn't live long enough to see today's internet age, but he anticipated something like it when he predicted discarnate man, a time where people would no longer meet face to face. People do not shape technology, McLuhan wrote. Technology shapes people.
He was right. The mega mall crowds out downtown. The web crowds out the mall. The future crowds out the past. What next? Some of us can wait to find out. Americans do not live by speed alone. Slowness also has its virtues. Here, for example, in tiny Tacoma Park, Maryland, local residents pride themselves on keeping the chain stores and the malls, mini and mega, outside. All of the stores, shops, and restaurants are locally owned. They have names like Mark's Kitchen and Taliano's Pizza and Chuck and Dave's Bookstore, names you never heard of before unless you lived here. Across America, a few towns like these still try to hang on to what's left of old-style community life, an old town square, farmers markets, parades, outdoor music in the summertime, a place to slow down. I'm Clarence Page.
Again, the major stories of this Thursday. President Clinton vetoed the big tax cut bill. Republicans vow to pass another one before Congress ends next year. And on the NewsHour tonight, Treasury Secretary Summers said the U.S. should be tough on Russian corruption, but supportive of more financial assistance. And before we go tonight, a remembrance of George C. Scott, the great actor who died Wednesday. Here he is in 1970 playing George Patton, the World War II Army general known as Blood and Guts.
I had a dream last night. In my dream, it came to me that right now the whole Nazi Reich is mine for the taking. Think about that, God. I was nearly sent home in disgrace. Now I have precisely the right instrument at precisely the right moment of history in exactly the right place. The Tsar? This will change, too, very quickly. Like a planet spinning off into the universe. A moment like this won't come again for 1,000 years. All I need is a few miserable gallons of gasoline. Right now, the weak spot is here. In 10 days, we could be in Berlin.
What about the fortifications at Verdun and Metz?
Fixed fortifications are monuments to the stupidity of man. Now, when mountain ranges and oceans can be overcome, anything built by man can be overcome. You know how I'm sure they're finished out there? The carts. They're using carts to move their wounded and the supplies. The carts came to me in my dream. They kept buzzing around in my head. I couldn't figure it out. And I remembered. That nightmare in the snow, the endless, agonizing retreat from Moscow. How cold it was. They took the wounded and what was left of the supplies and threw in the carts. The polling was finished. Not any color left, not even the red of blood. Only the snow. Look at this card. I love it. God help me, I do love it so. I love it more than my life.
George C. Scott was 71 years old. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening with Shields and G. Go, among others. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Imagine a system that produces and distributes food and helps improve nutrition and health here and abroad. Who is building such a global network?
And by Solomon Smith Barney.
Will we ever say, fill her up with hydrogen? One thing's for sure, opportunities abound. Solomon Smith Barney, success is earned.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. Davis Wright Tremaine, lawyers to the business community and individuals, with 13 offices worldwide. Portland Nursery, a passion for plants, a nursery for plant people at 50th and Stark and 90th and Division.
Behind the dark shadow of the Iron Curtain, they bowed to the will of their nation. Insiders unlock the secrets hidden by generations of espionage. Hear from the spies, the athletes, and the man who reached for the stars. What secrets will be revealed when you open the Red Files?
On OPB, Monday at 9.
I landed with the first wave at Omaha. Armed with nothing but my camera, I started shooting. Mortar fire was everywhere, yet I was able to capture image after image of the bravery and the horror of that day. The film made it back to London, but the negatives were burned in the developing process. Of the 106 photographs I took on D-Day, only 11 survived.
Now you know. OPB Store of Knowledge.
Funding for this evening's programming on OPB has been provided by viewers like you and by
Entech International, creators of microporous membrane and battery separator materials. Entech International, leadership, commitment, and innovation worldwide.
Next on Mystery.
Don't you believe in justice?
Our concern for justice might result in our deaths. A detour through deception and danger.